My name is Jenah Sagani, and I will be the moderator for the fourth ALIF webinar. ALIF, American Lived Ismaili Faith, is a new holistic and interdisciplinary year-long program that enables 11th and 12th grade students to explore American Ismaili Muslim history and heritage. Through ALIF, students will appreciate our presence as a part of the American Muslim community and explore how the Quran and our faith implores us to serve our community. ALIF's holistic program includes sessions with our sister institutions, including college preparation, health and fitness, budgeting and planning, and integrated mental health lessons. This program will be replacing SHARE and is being implemented in REC during the REC year. The ALIF webinar series has been conceived as an initiative across the youth serving Jamati Institutions aimed at engaging our secondary students and their parents, but is open to the entire Jamaat. Before we begin, I would like to read a land acknowledgement. A land acknowledgement is a formal statement that recognizes and respects Indigenous peoples as traditional stewards of this land and the enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and their traditional territories. To recognize the land is an expression of gratitude and appreciation to those whose territory we reside on, and a way of honoring the Indigenous people who have been living and working on the land from time immemorial. It is important to understand the long existing history, acknowledging that the land on which I reside is the occupied, unceded, ceased territories of the Akimal Odom tribe, and before that, the Hohokam people, whose elders stewarded this land for generations and now known as the Phoenix area. These tribes have stewarded this land throughout the generations, and we would like to pay our respects to elders, both past and present. We believe the work we do in sessions like these, and as a part of the ALIF program, are a part of our responsibility to acknowledge the ongoing harm that is done to Indigenous peoples on these lands, working towards a society that is more just, equitable, and in keeping with our traditions has brought us to reside on the land and to seek to understand our place within that history. Today, we will explore college planning with your student, where we hope to provide guidance on how to support your child in applying to college, myths to avoid, and finding education of the highest quality. During this session, you will also see a Q&A box through which you can share additional questions or thoughts during the presentation. We will try to address as many questions submitted during today's talk. With that, let me introduce you to our speakers today. First of all, we have Rahim Poonja. Rahim Poonja is a former member of the admissions committee at the University of Pennsylvania. Professionally, he is the head of operations for Compass, a real estate tech company, and resides in Chicago, Illinois. Rahim currently serves as the national board member on the Aga Khan Education Board for the US. Karima Jivani is a corporate strategist at Dell Technologies in Austin, Texas. Prior to Dell, Karima completed her MBA at Rice University, which led to her work in management consulting. Karima currently leads the Aga Khan Education Board's Apollo 12 advising program to support students and parents through their college application and admissions journey. Karima and Rahim have worked through the college application process with numerous students and families. Today's session highlights the most common themes families need to be familiar with during the college application process. I'm so honored now to turn to our wonderful speakers. Karima, will begin with you. Can you share your perspective on how parents should think about supporting their students who are in middle or high school? What are key areas they should consider?
Sure, Jenna, thank you. Depending on where your student is in their journey or what grade level they're in, there are different areas that you should focus on working through as you think about college planning. A student who's in their 11th grade year will have focus areas that are a little bit more tactical and specific with regard to the college application itself, whereas students who are earlier in their middle or high school journey will need to think about building their profile and shaping their high school experience. So during the planning process, regardless of what grade level your student may be in, we should think about both academic and non-academic factors, academic being course selection, what you're learning in the classroom, and non-academic factors include activities that your student may be involved with, volunteer work, etc. And both of those factors play a really critical role in shaping the profile of your student, and it impacts their holistic learning that can take place both in and outside the classroom. So if your student is in middle school or in their earlier high school years, we recommend starting by putting a plan together for their years leading up to college. So what I mean by that is work with your student to understand their interests, their passions, and their goals, and also what they're looking to achieve through this time period. This exercise can help inform the students' course selection in high school and even the types of activities they decide that they'd like to get involved with. So it's important for the student to have some direction that they're working toward during these early years, even though they're not specifically filling out a college application at this point. During these years, students have an opportunity to be exposed to multiple topics through their academic and non-academic involvement, and that will really enable them to build their knowledge and specific skills in particular areas that are of interest to them. So it's important that, once you build a plan with your student, that you continue to revisit that plan frequently, potentially every couple of months, and update it so that you can measure progress of your students' goals. And, what we'd like to say here is, a lot of times parents and students will develop a plan and maybe just think that this is the plan that we're going to keep for the next few years. But we do want to emphasize the importance of iterating on that and making sure that if there are changes that need to be made or tweaks, that can be done, because this is really the time that students have to explore and test areas that they might be interested in. This focus on learning, exposure, and building their skills each year will allow them to build their profile, and it will contribute to their college application down the line when they're ready to apply. So for example, when I talk about skill sets, right, if the student is in 9th grade and they're working on their communication and presentation skills, for example, can they consider joining the debate club to apply their knowledge and enhance their skills in that area? Is there another activity that may help them to strengthen those skills or excel in, what they've already developed or built on? These are the types of questions that we'd like, parents to pose to their student and, have that conversation so that each semester students can work on up-leveling their skills and demonstrate that continuous growth year over year. And even though college may feel far away for an 8th grader or 9th grader, in order to make that concept a little bit more real for the student, one of the things that we recommend is to start looking at some of the requirements for just a few colleges that maybe your student is starting to think about or aspires to attend. If you start, looking at what those college requirements look like, the student will get a sense of what colleges are asking on their application, what they're looking for in an applicant. And personally, for me, it's always helpful to kind of understand what that next milestone is going to be and what I'm working toward. So in this case, if the student has seen an application or has, researched a school or two, then they'll know that these are the different components and these are the areas that all of their experience in these current years is going to contribute to, both in the short and the long term. If your student is currently in 11th grade, they're getting close to starting their application in the next several months. So we understand that the college application can be really time consuming. And that's why it's important to effectively prioritize and map out the steps or actions that can lead to a strong application. You can start by working with your 11th grade student to build out an inventory of their academic and non-academic involvement and impact. This will really help kickstart the process in terms of your student reflecting on the courses they've taken and the activities they've been involved with, and also to see if they've built significant knowledge or experience in a particular domain or subject area. This inventory that we recommend to students can really be an artifact that you start building now, say in your first semester of your 11th grade year or earlier, and then you can leverage that to inform specific sections of the actual application once it's released. So there's a lot of work that can really be done before the application even comes out. And the inventory exercise really helps the student to recognize also if there are any gaps in their knowledge or experience. So for example, if the student is interested in pursuing a field of study related to data analytics in college, has he or she taken courses in statistics or applied math? Is there an opportunity to enroll in a higher level class in this area, maybe an AP or an IB course? Is there an opportunity for the student to get involved in an internship or a summer program that will help build the skills in those areas and enable additional exposure for the student? So these are areas that the family should start exploring now and identifying if there are gaps, how can we take action in the next several months to round out the student's experience and fill those gaps, before they start applying for college. And then another area that we recommend, similar to those students in the earlier grades, is to start researching schools. And in the 11th grade year, students may feel a little bit closer to this process and may be able to build out a more solid list of colleges that they'd like to apply to. And Rahim will cover, how to effectively build that college list. But initially, by creating a preliminary list, even in the beginning of the 11th grade year, it will provide an understanding of what colleges value in students, what the school can offer to your student, and how this higher education will really help support the student's longer term goals. So we do understand that college is an important milestone. I think all of us agree, but there are also many milestones that come after college. So it's important to remember that this is a stepping stone and an investment toward future goals. So in order to make sure that you and your student can really put the best foot forward, you should start early by having a plan and setting smaller, more manageable and actionable goals along the way that will help to then ultimately lead into that college application and a quality institution. I'd also like to briefly cover on the next slide the various elements of the college application. As you can see here, there's a mix of qualitative and quantitative components, both of which are important to colleges. Admissions committees are interested in understanding the full holistic picture of a student, which is actually a culmination of many of these elements coming together. They want to know what the student is going to contribute to the school, and this will be indicated not just through one or two of the components here, but multiple pieces weaved together. And that weaving, kind of happens as part of the personal statement or essay. That is one way that a student's narrative can be brought together and will showcase their interests, their values, and how the work they have done throughout their time in high school, including their extracurriculars, will really feed into the major they've selected and their future goals and why they want to attend a certain university. So keep in mind that throughout the process of planning, admissions committees are looking for achievement, not just participation. They want to see impact, they want to see outcomes, growth of the student, and areas where the student is able to excel. And this is why it's important to continue to revisit, where you are, what skills you're looking to develop, and continue to up-level those skills through that planning process. So this is a preview of the areas you can begin to plan with your students who are going to start their application soon. The personal inventory that I referenced earlier will help contribute to these components as well, and to that overall narrative that the student is going to present in their application. What we do, understand is the importance of bringing that story together, and that's why, we recommend creating these next steps for each of the areas or each of the boxes here, right? You can conduct research, you can get feedback on how you are putting together some of these elements, and all of those elements will help strengthen the student's application.
Thank you so much, Karima. Our families want the best quality of education for their children. Rahim, what are some of the resources our parents should look to when trying to identify good quality schools?
Thank you, Jenah, and Yalimudad, everyone. So Karima touched on a number of preparation steps that families and students can be taking. Once those efforts have been made, the next question is, where does a family start to consider the next step in that academic or educational journey? And so we would like to use this quote from Maulana Hazar Imam as a way to anchor our thinking and to even explore a little bit of how we guide our own decisions and perspectives. I'll read this quote here just for purposes of making sure that everybody is able to understand the words that are on this page. Quote, "There is no better investment that individuals, parents, and the nation can make than an investment in education of the highest possible quality. Such investments are reflected and endure in the formation of the kind of social conscience that our world so desperately needs," end quote. And you'll notice that this excerpt from a speech by Maulana Hazar Imam was actually delivered a couple of decades ago. But despite it being from the early part of the century, it actually has quite a lot of value and relevance to our time here today. Just like any farman, any guidance from Maulana Hazar Imam, there are so many ways that you can interpret this particular excerpt, and so many opportunities to reflect and spend time thinking about the words and the choice of words that Maulana Hazar Imam has made in putting this thought together. There's a couple that we just want to highlight if it's of value or of benefit. The first is this notion of education as being an investment. Oftentimes, we as a Jamaat, we as families, or as a community will refer to education as having a cost associated with it, or we talk about tuition as an expense. And while those are sort of short-term identifiers or ways of describing the education itself, we really want to think about education as an investment, because the 2 years or 4 years that a student undertakes in pursuing a college education or a college degree will, inshallah, serve that individual for approximately 45 years on average, at least in the United States. And so when we really think about kind of the notion of the investment that's required to attend a college or university, oftentimes we think about it in a very short-term way, and we really want to broaden that perspective and that horizon to understand how this education will serve the individual's career and career choices over the lifetime that individual will have. The other point, just to illuminate here, is this idea of what's highest possible for me and how that might look different for someone like Karima. So Karima, as an example, might be considering schools that are highly selective, that are very difficult to gain admission into, and for her, that might be considered highest possible quality. Whereas for me, I might be considering a different set of schools, but I may still be pushing myself and really kind of following certain sort of inspiration to think about attaining an education from a school which may or may not sort of fit within what I would consider, my safety choices or my default choices. And so when we think about this idea of what's highest and what's possible, it really is independent, and it sort of is subjective because it will depend on the students' sort of capabilities, their merits, and their goals and objectives that they have for themselves and for their families. And of course, as we all have heard during the Diamond Jubilee, the notion of education and what it can be used for and how it can be applied to understand LS creation, to serve society and humanity in general, and then to really sort of use those capabilities and those skills to strengthen the communities in which we are a part of. So we think about education in a more holistic fashion, through the guidance of Maulana Haji Imam. So we wanted to illuminate those. But as you spend time thinking about this quote and even reading the broader speech, you'll find moments of inspiration. You'll find nuggets of wisdom that you, inshallah, will be able to take as you think about the choices ahead for you and your family. So when we talk about kind of, the investment that we want to make and how we may go about discerning the right options that are available to us and that we want to pursue, there are really sort of two buckets of parameters or attributes that one can consider. There's sort of the measurable or quantitative metrics, and then the immeasurable or sort of qualitative metrics, if you will. Some of the metrics that schools use to measure themselves are publicly available. You can find these on the school's websites. Many other organizations, third-party organizations, will publish data so that it's very easy for you and for your student to understand what the average GPA is for incoming students, or the average standardized test score. You have other quantitative metrics such as how large an alumni base is that you might have access to as a student or graduate of a particular school. You have a sense for what the graduation rates are and how many students go off to certain careers or pursuing graduate studies. So there are a number of metrics that you can very quickly and easily gather in order to inform your thinking and your decision making. And then there are a number of sort of qualitative metrics that will be used to really round out the student's experience, to kind of give that student opportunities and to really sort of enable that student's growth and learning during that period of attendance. And so these include things like student life on campus, extracurricular activities, and guest speakers that might be coming onto campus, or conferences that might be hosted by the particular college. Many colleges will offer career support services, both for internships and full-time opportunities. So those sorts of things, which are maybe harder to measure, but are important to understand and to evaluate as you think about the investment that you want to make and where you may want to make the investment, depending on your child's and your own goals and objectives that you have for your family. So keeping this list in mind, and there may be other factors that you may consider that are not mentioned here, but the idea is that this is sort of a starting point for you to really think broadly, think holistically about what are the important matters, the important facets of the education that you will be investing in and that your child will be maximizing, so that it's not just thinking about how close is the school to my home or how much does it cost, but you're really thinking about what value you're getting, what return you're getting, and what benefits that particular education will serve you and will serve your student. When we think about the quantitative or the measurable aspects of a particular school, one of the topics that tends to come up frequently is this idea of rankings. And there are a variety of opinions on rankings and ratings of schools. And all of those we accept and we acknowledge. What we want to just bring to your attention is that when we are living as consumers in our daily lives, there are a number of ratings and rankings that we ourselves are using in order to make choices and in order to make decisions. So for example, if you are deciding to go on a vacation, inshallah, soon, as the COVID travel restrictions ease, you may look at hotel reviews, or you may look at even destination reviews. Those of you who may be deciding to dine out with family or friends will look at restaurant reviews to see either kind of menu selection or what previous customers have expressed as being great experiences or not so great experiences. For those of us who shop online, we sometimes look at product reviews and ratings in order to understand the quality and sort of the value that we might be getting from a particular purchase. And so very similarly, when we think about ratings and rankings of colleges, it's not meant to attach ourselves to a particular number of a school's ranking or to identify only schools within a certain segment or within a certain tier. But what it's hopefully intending to do is to give you directional perspective of an experience of a set of qualities and offerings that that school might have and might make available to your student when they are on campus. And so we often hear some Jamati members say that rankings are not a useful input in their decision-making, and that's completely their choice. But we also want you to think about when it comes to rankings and ratings, while we may have certain opinions and perspectives, the outside world also does. And so students who are applying to internships or applying to full-time opportunities or even graduate school, sometimes the ranking and the rating of the school that they intended for undergrad will play a factor at some level as to kind of what those decisions might look like and those opportunities that might be available to them. So while we're saying that rankings are not intended to, drive your decision or drive your investment choices, we want you to consider them at least to get a directional indication of the level of kind of quality or the level of experience that your student might get to consume while they are on a particular campus. The other point to highlight here is that many different organizations publish rankings throughout the year. So you have the US News and World Report's publication, you have the Wall Street Journal, you have a number of organizations, both domestic as well as international, that will publish an annual ranking. And it's important when you review these that you understand the methodologies that these organizations are following. So for example, some organizations may place heavier emphasis on graduation rates and may credit certain schools with higher graduation rates a bit more and sort of allow those particular schools to rise in the rankings. Other organizations may place heavier weighting or emphasis on research pursuits that their professors are engaging in, or may look at average ACT or SAT scores. And so we want to highlight that because it's important when you identify a school being rated or ranked a certain way with a particular organization, it's important to know why a school might be a number 3 or 7 or 12 with one organization, but might be a 30 or 35 or 40 with another organization. It's not that there's something is amiss, it's that the criteria or the methodology that's being used will vary quite dramatically. And so you will see a difference in terms of where even a given school might be ranked. So one of the things that the Agahan Education Board did earlier this year is we published the 2021 College Composite Ranking Report. And this report is intended to bring all of the different ranking systems that are out there, or at least several of the larger ranking systems that are out there, and really aggregate those and produce one composite ranking so that our Jamaat has a resource available so that you can review kind of collectively where a school might be reviewed or sort of might be evaluated. But in addition to that, there are a number of guiding points in this report that we encourage all of you to read and to review with your student. We talk in this report about how to think about schools. How do you bucket schools between reach, match, and safety options? How do you think about quality and sort of interpreting quality for a school that might be ranked higher versus lower? Oftentimes we see colleges that might be ranked lower, but their degree programs or sort of majors are well revered and well recognized within a particular industry. And so how do you evaluate and weigh those options as well? So there are a number of factors and a number of topics that are covered in this ranking report, and it's something that we definitely encourage each of you to consider in the weeks ahead.
Thank you, Rahim. This next question is also for you. What are some of the myths of the college application process? What are some of the do's and don'ts?
Yeah, it's another great question. And the myths that we'll share with you are ones that we've heard from our Jamaat. So these are pertinent to our families, to our communities across the United States. These are ideas and sort of thoughts that come up in regular conversations that we have with families. So there's a couple that we want to highlight because you may be thinking about these yourselves. And so we want to provide some perspective and some additional guidance if it's helpful as you discuss some of the options with your students ahead. The first one and the most common one that we hear is that students or parents saying that their child has to attend college near home. And while we understand that, especially in this current situation with COVID and some of the concerns that have been prevalent over the last year and a half, that we want to keep our children close. We want to maybe even consider having them live at home during the first couple of years or during their entire college education. And what we would like to do in this scenario is, you know best your situation and your family's needs. What we want to do is just encourage you to think about having to attend college near home versus wanting to attend college near home. Oftentimes, we encounter students who are working part-time or full-time to support their families financially. We have situations where families have a family member with significant medical needs, and the student has to play a role in that family member's care and recovery. And so we understand that there are circumstances in our Jamaat where students do have to stay close to home and have to attend a college or a university that is nearby. But in instances where the student might have a bit more freedom to think about other options, whether those be within the student's hometown or outside. But when we think about some of those measurable and immeasurable factors, those are the things you want to consider, and those are the things you want to evaluate when you think about your child's learning and development and growth opportunities. So if you were to have a conversation with us and you said, my child has chosen to attend a school within 5 miles or 25 miles from where we live, but they've chosen to do that because the major that they're considering is one of the best, kind of the college that's near us has one of the highest kind of levels of performance when it comes to a particular major, or my child is very interested in conducting a research of a certain kind within a certain domain, and the professors at this school are really sort of at the top of their game related to that. So as long as you have a rationale, sort of an explanation for why a school near home makes sense. Again, if you have the option of being able to evaluate a variety of schools across the country, then we are all in support of that, assuming that you've done the homework, you've done the research, and you've made sort of a choice that is allowing your child to pursue education of the highest possible quality. The other thing that we encourage families to think about is, even if your child does ultimately decide to attend college near home, it's still okay to apply to colleges outside of your home city or your home state. And that's because when you do receive, inshallah, acceptances from those other colleges, you can then take those acceptances to your home college and say, we are getting better financial aid offers or better financial aid packages at these other schools. What can you offer us? And so it becomes a negotiating tactic when you have acceptances from other colleges and universities, whether those be within your home state or outside. So it's something that's worth considering. The other thing that we often hear is families saying that they will send their child to a better ranked graduate school in the future. And while this is, again, a great thing that you're already thinking about graduate school so early in the journey, one of the things that we'll share with you, or the secret that we'll share with you, is that there is no limit on how many great schools your child can attend. So they can go to a fantastic undergraduate school, and they can go to a fantastic graduate school. So, again, it's ensuring that you're thinking about your options for college in a holistic manner, that you are talking with your child to understand what is the best option for them when it comes to education of the highest possible quality, and you're thinking about the college choices as an investment. We also hear families and students say that, such and such uncle or such and such cousin attended a university, and we're very familiar with it, and so we're going to send our child there as well. And it's great that you've done the research, that you've started to understand what a particular school has to offer, but realize that every child, every person is different. Every person's learning style is different. Every person's career goals and learning needs might be different. And so, while I may thrive in a public university that has 50,000 students, Karima might need a very sort of smaller scale, liberal arts type college where the total class size is about 600 students. And so it's important to understand when we're making choices, just like we do as consumers, what the schools have to offer you, what the learning experience and learning environment is like, and how can our students capitalize and maximize those learning opportunities. We also hear students sometimes say that they can't apply to so many schools because each school has an application fee. And this is true. Application fees for each school will range from $25 or $50 all the way up to $100 to $150. So it's a very wide range. In some ways, the school uses the applications as a way to generate revenue. So it's a business for them. But if you are in a situation as a family where you are unable to afford applying to 5 schools or 6 schools or 15 schools, if you do have that financial need, work with your high school counselor or your student's high school counselor to secure application fee waivers. Those are available to you, not just for applications, but also for the standardized tests. And so if your family does fit into a certain profile, then the school will facilitate and the colleges will facilitate a way for you to have those fees waived. So that application fee should not be a barrier if that is of your concern. But again, if you are using the application fee cost as a preventative way of applying to more schools, again, we would guide you to think about college and education as an investment rather than a cost, because as we shift our language and we change our vocabulary, it starts to alter our mindset and our perspective as well. For those of you who might be in sort of 10th, 11th, or 12th grade, you may have started to hear from your peers or even others before you say that, make sure you apply early round or early decision because your chances of getting in are much higher. There is no scientifically proven research that has been done to show that students who apply in an early round actually have a higher likelihood of getting accepted. What happens is the students who are applying to the early decision or early admit rounds are students who have been waiting 3 or 4 years, maybe even longer, to submit their application. And so they've spent a number of years doing research on the top schools on their list. They have gone and visited the campuses, or maybe have visited the campus virtually through the website. They know the ins and outs of the school. They know what classes they would take on day one, what clubs and activities they would sign up for. In effect, they've done an extraordinary amount of research, and that research and that enthusiasm comes through in their application. And so if you compare the numbers alone, you'll see that the acceptance rate for an early round is higher than the acceptance rate for regular rounds. But that's because the students who are applying early are so eager and so enthusiastic, and they've done the research and it shows in their application. So what many colleges have said is that students who apply early and get accepted will very likely be accepted if they were to apply in a regular round. So the guidance here is submit your application when your application is ready and complete, not just because you think you're trying to play the game or play the odds. And then finally, we've heard comments from families, particular and parents, saying that they don't want their child to apply to such and such university because that university is very expensive or has a high cost of attendance. And we know that this is a concern. We know that for many families, even saving for an entire lifetime may not allow for enough of a cushion to provide for covering the cost or the investment in an education. But there are 2 quotes that we want to share with you here. Hopefully that helps, dispel the myth of college being expensive, or even college of a certain, segment or a certain tier being expensive. The first quote is from the Dean of Admissions at Yale University. Many of you might be familiar with Yale. It's considered a top 5 or even a top 3 college within the United States and sometimes within the world. And the quote from the dean here is that if you would get into Yale, we feel sure that cost will not be a barrier in your decision to attend. Now, I'll pause there because it's a very powerful statement that the Dean of the Admissions program, sort of the Dean of Admissions at Yale is putting out there. And this is publicly made on their website. So you can go and visit the website. The link is there and you can see it for yourself. But for a university like Yale, whose cost of attendance is upwards of $50,000 or $60,000, and that's just the tuition, what they're telling you is that they want to accept you because you have demonstrated capabilities and competencies and excellence that they want to bring into their community and into their student body. And they feel that they can be a partner in your educational journey. And if cost is the factor that is preventing you from applying or enrolling, then they want to make sure that that is not a concern for you. Similarly, the second quote here is on the website for Harvard University. Many of us are familiar with that school. And it says, quote, for more than 90% of American families, Harvard costs less than a public university. Now imagine that, because many of us think about public universities and think about public universities as having a lower tuition amount. And so we oftentimes will encourage our students or encourage our nieces and nephews to apply to public universities. And while that's a great option, because maybe that public university offers that student something unique, it's very eye-opening to think that Harvard can cost less than a public university. And again, it's because these schools have very large amounts of endowments. They have very generous financial aid packages, and especially aid packages for families that fit a particular financial profile or socioeconomic profile. And so they want to ensure that if they are accepting you, and their acceptance decisions are usually me blind, which means that they have no idea what your financial profile looks like until after they have accepted you. And so while these schools make decisions of admissions, kind of solely on your students' capabilities and achievements and contributions, they want to then make sure that once they've accepted you, that they will do everything in their powers to make sure that you can walk on campus, or that your student can walk on campus. And partly for this, partly the reason here is that they're trying to protect what's called their yield rate. And that means if I send out 10 acceptances as a university, I want to make sure as many as those 10 students come and attend my university, because it affects my yield. So if 8 of those students come and join my college, then I have an 80% yield rate. If 6 students attend, then I have a 60% yield rate. And so these universities, because they are so highly ranked across many different publications, they want to make sure that they're protecting their yield, because it has an influence in their rankings as well. So we want to share that with you, because we sometimes as a Jamaat, as families, feel that a particular school of a certain profile may be too expensive, and we automatically close the door without even considering applying. There is very little cost to applying, if anything, and especially if you're concerned about costs, as we said, you can consider the application fee waivers. But know that if you just apply, and the chances and sort of the rates of acceptance are quite low for schools like this. They're in single digits, but across the board, if you think about the top 50, the top 100, the top 200 schools, if you consider applying to those schools, you start the conversation with that school about why you're interested, what you're hoping to achieve, and how they can partner with you in your journey.
Thank you, Rahim. Going through the college application process is extremely demanding for families and the student. Karima, what advice would you have for families during this time?
I can definitely appreciate how busy high school can be for families and students, and adding a college application to the mix makes it even more challenging. But there are a few tips we'd like to share here that may help parents and families understand what their role can be in this process and how you can help support your student through this time. So just like we've recommended the students to do research on their schools and where they want to apply and what's interesting to them, we recommend that families and parents do the same thing. Make sure that you're informed about the college application process, the requirements, and also the other piece is remaining objective. Many of the criteria that Rahim described previously is something that parents can definitely keep in mind and bring forward as the student is going through the process, because we understand this is a really emotional time. It can be very busy and demanding. And so making sure that there are multiple people coming to the table to support the student through the process, asking those questions, the critical questions that are needed, and remaining objective will be really critical in providing a balanced view and providing your objective feedback to the student as they're going through the process. And you also want to make sure that the perspectives are remaining broad, and there's a vision of where the student is trying to go with their college application and their future goals versus narrowing down during the application process. Another critical next step that we've highlighted here and that you've heard earlier is creating that plan. And so if your student is in 8th grade or in sometime in their middle school years, you can sit down and kind of create a timeline for when they can tackle different topics, such as their plan for which courses to take in their next few years, the maybe top 2 or 3 areas of interest that they want to explore further, which can be through academic means or through their extracurricular involvement, and really making sure that when you're thinking about what to put together in terms of these plans, that you're including some of those qualitative elements as well. Maybe there are soft skills and hard skills that the student wants to look to develop, and they have a few years to start working through that process before they get into the application itself. So really being intentional about what the student wants to accomplish, and supporting them through that process and providing some of your perspectives along with that. And then if the student is in 11th grade, for example, there will still be a plan, but the plan will look a little bit different. And it will definitely need to be a multi-month plan. Maybe you set a cadence for how often you'll even bring up college-related topics to your student, and when you'll work on developing the college shortlist, for example, with them. So you can create an initial, say, a cadence of, okay, over the next 3 months, we're going to dedicate a couple hours every second Saturday of the month to go through the researching process to develop that list of schools, right? And block out that time. And then as the student gets into their second semester of their 11th grade year, maybe that frequency is increased. But really setting the expectation, right? And having the conversation with your student of how frequently should we be discussing this? How can we support your plan and work through that so that it's not more stressful or more demanding later on when the applications are actually released, and the student has to work through a lot of the elements that may have been able to be developed earlier on or worked through earlier on. And then finally, we would recommend leveraging our Jamaat and your local communities to really develop a network of parents who are going through the college application process with their students, or those parents who already have students that are attending high quality institutions. Really, you should take advantage of that power of learning and sharing of knowledge amongst the Jamaat and your communities, because this will really help you to exchange ideas, ask the right questions, learn from people who've already gone through the process, and how they have managed that interaction with their student and the support with their student. So most of these steps, all of these steps can be translated into actionable next steps that you can start today or you can start tomorrow. And we highly encourage that you start having those conversations early on with the student about what they're looking to achieve and how you're going to be there to support them.
Thank you so much for the insightful information, Karima and Rahim. The college application process has certainly changed from when I went to university, and I truly appreciate you both sharing details around creating a skills inventory, considering the value or investment the student may get from a college, and other factors to consider when applying to schools. I know our audience today also appreciates your insightfulness and wisdom. We have received a few questions from our audience, which we would love to hear your insights on. With that, let's turn to our first question. And Rahim, I believe this is for you. We have a family friend who attended a great school, but didn't end up with a good job after graduation. Why is a better ranked school worth the investment?
This is such a great question. So first off, thank you for using the word investment in your question. It means that we're already shaping your opinions and your perspectives. Yes. So again, just to reiterate, the usage of the term investment is so critical because it helps us think about putting funds towards a particular pursuit, but then expecting a particular outcome or a set of outcomes from that investment. So thank you for incorporating that. The other thing that we want to highlight is, a student or an individual in general, again, in the United States, on average, has a 45-year career span, 45-year career span. And so when you think about that duration of time, if we use one job that a graduate or an individual is holding today and make our own choices based on that other individual's decision making, then it is possibly dangerous and it could be very damaging. When you think about the full career span of individuals, whether that be 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, because many individuals are working well into retirement, and you make an assessment based on all the career choices that somebody has made. But you also think about education as setting you up for having a variety of career choices. So, in the course of a 45-year career span, you will have many even, job options and career options, but even complete career changes, right? And Hazram has talked about this a lot as to sort of what the average number of career changes a person will experience or endure over their lifetime. And so, we want to be cautious about pinpointing to an edge case in a situation where somebody may have graduated from a fantastic university, but is not working, in a way that we would expect them to. It's okay. It's understandable. It happens sometimes, but we want to be careful as to not oversimplify what a school has to offer based on one individual's short-term career decision. So that's kind of the second point. The third point is that there's no guarantee, and our college composite ranking report actually discusses that at length, is that just because I attend a school of a certain caliber or a certain rank does not mean that I'm guaranteed success. I have to work extraordinarily hard, just like everybody else, to make sure that I have a set of goals and priorities and objectives in mind, that I'm figuring out how to unlock those opportunities that the school is offering me in order to achieve my goals and objectives, and that I'm bringing and sort of sharing that knowledge and kind of, enhancing the student community where I'm attending school. And so while, it is sometimes a relief for many families when their student is accepted to a particular college or university, it is by no means meant to be a guarantee. So the student has to continue to work hard, continue to make investments of time and effort, and continue to sort of be able to realize the options and sort of the outcomes that might be available to them. And then the last thing I'll just touch on is, circling back to this notion of investment. We hope that when students and families pursue education of a certain quality or caliber, that return of the investment is something that the student will realize, that their family will realize, and that the Jamaat will realize. And that's something that we want to make sure we emphasize, is because we have many young professionals today, many college students even, who are coming back and who are serving in our institutions, who are serving through our camps and interacting with a number of our Jamati members, as well as a number of outside members of other communities. And so we want to think about the return that we're able to provide and enable, not only for ourselves and for our own gains, but also the gain and the benefit of the Jamaat as well.
Thank you, Rahim. Karima, the next question is for you. You had mentioned that we should up-level a skill at the middle school level. Can you please provide a concrete example of what this up-leveling might be?
Sure. So I would think about this from an evolution of the skill that you're trying to develop, right? So if there is something that a student is interested in, say an example could be coding, right? There are students that are starting this much earlier on in their academic career. If the student is interested in coding, one, I would have the parent discuss with the student what is the rationale for that, why are they interested there? And then think through, okay, maybe they took one class in coding. What is the next step? Potentially building additional expertise in a particular area. So maybe there's a boot camp, that's for a couple of weeks that they can join. What would be next, right? I would think about this from a learning and an application standpoint. So if you're learning through that course, you're learning through that boot camp, then how can I apply some of the knowledge that I've gained through that process? So maybe that would mean building an app, or a product of a video game or something like that if the student is very interested in this space and continuing to excel, right? Because so that would be an example of getting the knowledge, getting additional expertise in that area, and then applying that knowledge, because that really allows the student to understand what that coding experience looks like, what does that mean when I apply it, and what can that mean in terms of future use cases? What can I do with this skill in the future? And how can I demonstrate that I have, an expertise and growth in this area to the college admissions committees?
Thank you, Karima. The next question is for either of you. For universities who have the SAT, ACT optional, do you think students who submit their SAT, ACT scores have an advantage over the ones who don't?
Do you want me to go, Karima? Do you want to give a thought?
Okay.
So the shift to test optional has really dramatically changed the college admissions process. Last year, when tests became optional at many colleges and universities, the number of applications that colleges received ballooned effectively. And because more applications were received by colleges, the acceptance rates actually declined quite significantly. And so a number of explanations were attempted when trying to justify or trying to reflect back on what had happened in the last cycle. One theory is that because colleges became test optional, it meant that students who were previously intimidated by certain colleges or who felt that they would not perform well on standardized tests, all of a sudden had this huge burden lifted and became excited about these colleges that they thought were previously out of reach. The second thought is that because the Common App platform, which many colleges participate in, where you develop one application and you can submit it to tens of 20 schools, the thought was that it was very easy for students to just add another school and submit an additional application, especially because many of us were being kind of coached and sort of reflecting on our college choices in general. The third factor that sort of played a role is that from the prior year, when COVID sort of first came to the United States, many students who had been accepted to some of the various colleges across the country had deferred their admissions. And so therefore, the thought was that those students who had deferred their admission were then going to enroll a year later, which then reduced the number of seats that were available for colleges to offer to incoming students. So there were a number of factors, and it almost became this perfect storm for why acceptance rates actually dropped and plummeted really in the last year. It's unclear what's going to happen in the current cycle. But one thing is for sure, if I have a standardized test score, which I'm happy with, which I'm excited about submitting to a school, I am competing with other applicants. Let's say Karima, I'm using you as an example, but Karima is maybe applying to the same school as me, and she's not submitting her test score. So for the admissions committee, it becomes very difficult to evaluate my profile against Karima's profile. And assuming we have very similar achievements or background, they are really kind of leaning on the other components of the application to then inform their thinking and inform their decision making. So for this current upcoming cycle, many of the colleges that went test optional last year are keeping that policy in place, but it means that you are now competing against a larger pool of applicants than you may have in a previous cycle. That being said, if you are someone who doesn't test well and now you kind of can apply to colleges that are test optional, your opportunity has just broadened. The kind of the set of schools you can consider has broadened. And so one of the things that we are guiding and coaching our 12th grade students this year is that if you're considering applying to 2 schools, maybe apply to 4. If you're considering 5 schools, maybe apply to 8, so on and so forth. So whatever number of schools you were considering for your applications, add a couple more, because you want to cast as wide of a net as possible, because it is very unclear what's going to happen, and you don't know how your application is going to be reviewed and evaluated in the current dynamic as compared to pre-COVID, when it was a bit more streamlined or more straightforward. Karima, anything to add to that?
I think you covered it.
Karima, the next question's for you. You had mentioned taking a personal inventory in preparation for the college application. Could you walk through an example of what a personal inventory could be?
Sure. So in terms of the inventory, I would think about it from like an academic and course perspective, as well as the activities that the student may be involved with. So if we start with the courses, I think that's pretty clear in terms of the courses that the student has taken and what they are expecting to take in the next couple of years. And looking at, how does this match up against a particular major field of study or skill set that they're trying to work toward. But that is, understanding, okay, I've taken X number of honors classes or X number of AP and IB courses, and this is kind of how it falls into the map of different subject areas. In terms of things that are not in the classroom, and if we think about extracurricular activities, this is where students can really be involved in multiple different activities throughout the course of their high school career. So what we recommend here is to start by first drafting down what have you been involved with, what is the time commitment that you have spent within that particular activity. How have you, so say you have been involved in the activity for 2 or 3 years. What did your involvement look like in the first year versus did you move to any leadership positions or additional areas that you impacted as part of that particular activity? And then ensuring that you are really jotting down, and this is before the application comes out, for that activity, what was your specific contribution? Even if you have a leadership role, what was your specific contribution or impact beyond just the title of that role? What did you do? How can you quantify the impact that you made? And then also, it may be helpful to link all of these attributes back to what was your overarching goal or rationale, or something like that in terms of why you joined this activity. Was there a certain cause that you were working toward, a certain passion of yours that you were working to build toward? And having all of those components and attributes listed will help, once you start building out your actual application, to connect pieces together. So there may be 3 or 4 activities that are contributing to the same cause that that you're interested in, and maybe that's something that you end up writing your personal statement around, bringing all of those elements together and connecting those dots. So that's an example of how that inventory can be created. Rahim, do you have anything to add?
Yep, I think that was a fair approach.
Thank you, Karima. Would you have any tips on how families with higher income can avail scholarships at private universities? So this question is for either of you.
So I can start, and Rahim, feel free to chime in. From a scholarship standpoint, there are multiple types of scholarships. So if we're talking about the higher income space, then there are scholarships that are from the university, and then there's also scholarships from the from other organizations that may just be part of your local community as well. And if you are looking for scholarships in those areas, there are merit-based scholarships that universities definitely give out based on if you meet a certain threshold of certain metrics that they're looking at, quantitative or qualitative. So that is one way to get scholarships at the university that you're applying to. And then the other way is, like I mentioned, there are local scholarships, or there are cause-based scholarships that you can research online. And there are multiple resources out there for search engines for scholarships. And it's not necessarily all around need. So if you have a background in a particular area, maybe your ethnic background, or maybe some experience that you've had in the past, or like I mentioned, if you were really involved with coding, there can be scholarships around that, or the major that you're going into. So I would recommend looking at all of those avenues, not just scholarships specifically from an institution. Rahim?
Yeah, and again, if we're thinking about scholarships even before we think about applying, it's good to be proactive and to sort of plan, but we may be limiting ourselves because those schools, even though we may have a certain financial profile or economic profile, those schools may still be willing to offer a variety of options. So it's worth, it's worth applying. And as we said earlier, once inshallah those acceptances start coming in, then you can even play those schools against each other, assuming that they are peer schools. You can play those schools against each other to then negotiate. Just like, for those of you who may have purchased a car, you know that you don't pay the sticker price, or you try not to. And so very similarly, when it comes to a college education, you try not to pay the sticker price. And so whether it be a number of resources that are through the school or outside the school, there's ways for you to bridge that. If students who are in the current 12th grade REC, in a couple of weeks, we'll actually be talking to those students about scholarship options and ways to fund their education. So that will definitely be available. If you want a preview of that, you can actually go to tinyurl.com/ALIF-AKEB-2021, and you can see some of the materials that will be presented to students in week 13. We can actually drop the link in the chat as well for those of you who might be interested. But there are a number of financial aid and scholarship options that are worth exploring. We actually do make a list available through Apollo 12 for those participants. But you're welcome to use that. It's actually referenced in the week 13 material that's posted on the website. And then the other thing I'll just add is, since we were talking about standardized tests, I'm dropping into the chat the guidance that we recently published on preparations for standardized tests, how to think about test optional policies, and whether you may or may not want to consider taking a test depending on your own readiness as well as kind of your own abilities. So that's something that we will we'll put into the chat as well for those of you who may be interested.
Thank you so much, Karima and Rahim, and to the audience for a wonderful conversation this evening. A couple of announcements before you go. There were additional questions that we couldn't get to. If you have a question that wasn't answered, please email the Aga Khan Education Board. The email address will be provided in the chat. Secondly, the Economic Planning Board for the West is hosting a financial literacy and planning program on November 21st virtually. There are 2 sessions discussing college savings and guide to college financing. Again, the registration link will be posted in the chat box. To learn more about ALIF or to join the team, please visit the link again in the chat box. And for a recording of this conversation and past conversations, please visit the Facets of Faith page on the Islamic USA. Link is in the chat box. And finally, please take the survey at the end of the session. That will pop up on your screen as you leave. We would love to collect your feedback. Thank you all again, Yali Madat, and have a wonderful evening.